For those who came to such an end, there was sure hope of immortality and the eternal enjoyment of blessings. In the Islamic view, you're going to get these houris, these virgins and so on in paradise. They've just elaborated it a bit. This is 2,000 years old, you see. Whereas the mean-spirited, who don't know anything of this kind of teaching, through ignorance cling to life and choose death by disease rather than death in the way of righteousness. The way of righteousness is surely the way of the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's what they're preaching all the time. Josephus says the Essenes didn't mind dying any kinds of death in our recent war with the Romans. They were tortured and racked, as I read you, and no one would blaspheme the lawgiver or eat things sacrificed to idols. They preferred death. While they were preaching, thus it was rumored that the king was actually dying. So the young men undertook the task with more confidence. At midday, when the masses of people were walking about the temple courts, they lowered themselves by stout ropes. Here's the interruption of commerce in the temple that we're going to get later in the Gospels. From the roof, began to cut down the golden eagle with axes. The news quickly reached the king's officers, who hurried to the spot and with a large force seized about 40 young men and took them before the king. He started to ask them why they had dared to cut down the golden eagle. They said that they had done so, and who told them to do it? Their answer: the law of our fathers, the Mosaic law, the law of Moses, what Paul calls the Sinaitic covenant of Hagar. What made them so cheerful? I do not observe the law, so don't think I'm not an advocate of the law, but I'm an advocate of people's belief in things to be fairly presented. I'm an advocate that you should understand what people are thinking and feeling. So I'm not saying you should die for the law. I'm not going to do that, obviously. But I can admire and respect people who think that way, and who are willing to go to death for their beliefs, if you want to call it. What made them so cheerful when they were about to be executed? The knowledge, like Christian martyrs later, that they would enjoy greater blessings after their death. Then the king exploded with rage, and forgetting his sickness, went out to address the public meeting. He attacked the men as temple robbers, just like the scrolls do the people they oppose, who, pleading the law as an excuse, had an ulterior motive and demanded that they be given the punishment for sacrilege, which is something of what Jesus is given in the scripture. The people, fearing punitive measures on a wide front, begged him to punish first those who had suggested the attempt, then those who had been caught in the act, and to take no action against the rest. And in one of the Gospels it stated that the priests or whoever they are believe that it's better one man die for the people than the whole people be punished. One of the rationales for cooperating in the arrest of Jesus, that's given in the Gospels. Well, you see, that's previewed here, that kind of thinking. Whether it's actual or not, you're going to have to be the one to weigh it. The king reluctantly agreed. Those who had lowered themselves from the roof together with the rabbis, he burned alive. The rest of the men he seized and handed over to his attendants for execution. So even at that time, the people were being burned alive for issues of what were considered sacrilege by the Herodian powers anyway, with the rabbinic collusion by this point and the high priestly collusion that the Herodians had put in the place of the Maccabean priesthood previously. When was the last Maccabean high priest? When Jonathan, the brother of Herod's Maccabean wife Miriam, was drowned in the pool in Jericho, and the people cried because the people had cried when they saw him put on the high priestly vestments. So it was after Jonathan was drowned, let's say around maybe the 20s, 10s BC, I don't have the exact date of that in the back of my head, that this group of the priests took over, who were appointed more yearly. Herod took the vestments of the high priest under control. Later the Roman governors took them, and they would parcel them out to different families for maybe a payment or bribery or whatever, because to control the high priesthood is to control the temple banking system. So it's pretty good to get in a position of that kind of power, not just for honorary purposes, but for other mercenary and other kind of purposes. So then they made it kind of a temporary tenure. So the Roman and Herodian power would be more secure and pronounced. They wouldn't have to deal with a hereditary high priesthood, single Maccabean one, but a group of high priests. That's why in the Gospels we speak of the chief priests. The high priests plural. So that's very important. The Dead Sea Scrolls speak of the last priests, meaning high priests of Jerusalem, plural. To me, that reference alone in the Habakkuk commentary, which is very much against these high priests, disapproves of them, despises them, hates them, considers them mercenary crooks and people who had, incurred pollution by their activities. That to me dates these as being in the Herodian period. Now most scholars say, oh, the scrolls are before the Herodian period, they're in the Maccabean period. Yes, they do it on external parameters, but not on internal parameters. They think they can do it by studying the handwriting of the documents, which is as stupid as studying, what's that guy who was arrested in Thailand and brought to America, and they have notes supposedly in his hand, yeah, Mark John Carr, whatever his name is. I mean, this is what handwriting specialists, yeah, it's a skill to do that, but it's not science. You can't rely on handwriting as opposed to clear internal indications and evidence and documents. When we get a document that says the foreign invaders sacrificed to their standards and worshiped their weapons of war, there's only one person or group of people that did that, that's the Roman army, and it's in the imperial period. You can't then say that this is a document in the 2nd century BC. So, the internal evidence takes precedence over the kind of external evidence we have in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So they rely, and I made the mistake of calling for carbon testing of the Dead Sea Scroll, which was my greatest error in my whole struggle over the scroll thing. I described that error in my new book, because the people that took over the carbon testing then skewed the tests to support their thesis. You say, well, what do you mean skewed? Well, even the FBI crime lab, when you get evidence there, it almost always comes out in favor of the people who submit the evidence for testing, because it involves a certain amount of interpretation. These are not hard and fast things with the margins of error that exist. So the people doing the testing, who know the results that are expected, often come out with the results. Not always, but the FBI crime lab, one of the best labs in the world, has been notorious for doing this. So these, helter-skelter carbon testing labs that they drum up here and there to do a certain kind of testing come out with results.